The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a harsh glow on the concrete walls of Mark Caldwell's barracks. Outside, the steady hum of military vehicles and distant helicopter blades reminded him that war was a constant presence. Something you never really left behind, even when you were thousands of miles from the front lines. Mark sat on his cot, his eyes fixed on the photograph perched on the metal frame of his bunk. It was a simple 5.57, the edges fraying from years of travel. His wife Emma smiled brightly, her blonde hair catching the sunlight as she held their 2 children, Hannah and Lucas. Hannah was 12 now, Lucas just 9. In the picture, they stood outside their modest home in Colorado Springs, leaves from the big maple tree casting playful shadows over the driveway. It was a moment frozen in time, a reminder of what he was fighting to protect, but lately the photo felt more like a lie. Mark ran his thumb over Emma's face, the glass scratched and scuffed from deployments. Her smile had been genuine once, full of life and promise. Now, their video calls were strained, her eyes flickering off-screen as if she were searching for a way out. Their conversations had shortened, replaced by hollow small talk and hurried goodbyes. She always had an excuse: a book club meeting, a late night at the office, a headache that made her too tired to chat. He tried to ignore the nagging feeling at first. Deployment did things to a person, made you paranoid, jumpy, suspicious of things that weren't there. Or at least that's what Emma had said the last time he brought it up. You're just seeing shadows, Mark. It's the war. It makes you think everyone's the enemy. But it wasn't just his imagination. He'd found the receipts, expensive dinners at restaurants he'd never heard of in towns an hour away. She'd brushed them off with a laugh, saying she'd gone out with coworkers. New friends, she claimed. Friends she never mentioned before. He'd let it slide, once, twice, 3 times, until the excuses stacked up so high that he couldn't ignore them anymore. The final straw came in the form of a text message. It arrived on his satellite phone while he was in the middle of a briefing. "Don't call tonight. Taking the kids to Mom's." At first, it seemed normal enough, but then he remembered her mom lived in downtown Colorado Springs, full bars of exception. Mark stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. It was a lie. A sloppy, careless lie. That's when his instincts kicked in. He wasn't just a soldier. He was trained in intelligence, information gathering, and threat assessment. It was his job to spot inconsistencies, to recognize when things didn't add up. And right now, his life wasn't adding up. Mark pulled out his personal tablet, the one that held every security protocol he had installed at the house before he left. Emma didn't know about it, didn't know that he'd wired the place with cameras disguised as ordinary fixtures. He had set it up for peace of mind, for the ability to look in on his kids whenever he wanted. But now it served another purpose. The screen flickered to life, and with a few taps, the feed from the living room camera appeared. The living room was quiet, untouched. Mark tapped over to the kitchen, nothing there either. He scrolled through the different rooms, playroom, study, the backyard, all empty. Finally, he selected the master bedroom. The screen glowed for a moment before resolving into the familiar view of his room. At first, everything seemed normal. The bed was made, the curtains were drawn halfway, just the way Emma liked it. But then he saw it, a dark leather jacket thrown casually over his reading chair. It wasn't his. He zoomed in, his pulse quickening. The logo on the sleeve, Harley Davidson. Mark didn't own a bike, never had. His finger hovered over the screen, recording every second. He zoomed out, catching movement near the edge of the camera's view. Emma stepped into the room, a wine glass in hand, followed closely by a man Mark had never seen before. Tall, dark hair, smug grin. He moved comfortably, as if he belonged there. They laughed, clinking glasses before the man placed his hand on her waist, drawing her close. Mark's hands clenched into fists, but he didn't look away. He couldn't. His military instincts told him to gather intelligence, observe, and wait for the right moment to act. His training had taught him patience, to let the enemy expose their vulnerabilities before striking. And right now, Emma was, exposing every lie she had told him. The man, Daniel Collins, Mark would later learn, leaned in, whispering something into Emma's ear that made her laugh and lean into his touch. Mark hit the record button, capturing it all. His face was stone cold, his heart hardened by betrayal and discipline. He watched as they moved out of view, and he waited, still recording, still observing. He knew this wasn't just a mistake. This was calculated. Planned. Emma had moved on, and now it was his turn to do the same. But not before she paid for every ounce of trust she had shattered. Mark closed the tablet and locked it with military precision. His jaw tightened as he whispered to himself, "You wanted a war, Emma. You've got one." Mark sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the screen in front of him. The recording of Emma and that man, Daniel Collins, played on a loop, each frame burning itself into his memory. He could still hear the low hum of the bass outside, the muffled sounds of soldiers preparing for another mission. But right now, his mission was different. It was personal. He couldn't just sit there and fume. He needed answers. Who was this man that had invaded his home? Why had Emma lied so casually? The situation felt too calculated, too precise. Years in military intelligence had taught him that coincidences were rarely just that. There was always a pattern. He just needed to find it. Taking a deep breath, Mark pulled out his secure satellite phone and dialed a familiar number. "Yo, Caldwell," came the gravelly voice on the other end. "What's up?" "James, I need your help. Urgently." There was a pause. Mark didn't make personal calls during deployment unless it was serious. "What's going on, man?" James Monroe asked, his voice shifting from casual to focused. "Something's wrong at home. I need to look into someone without raising alarms. Can you meet me in the secure comm center?" James didn't hesitate. On my way. James was already booting up one of the encrypted terminals when Mark arrived. He was a wiry guy with quick hands and a sharper mind. As the unit's communications specialist, he had access to advanced tools that most soldiers wouldn't even know existed. "What's this about?" James asked as Mark sat down next to him. Mark glanced around the room, making sure they were alone. "I need you to help me dig into someone's background. It's personal." James raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to use military resources for this? You know the protocols." "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," Mark replied, his tone firm. "I think my wife's cheating on me. And it's more than that. The guy she's seeing, it doesn't add up. I need to know who he really is." James nodded slowly. "All right, let's do this. Name?" "Daniel Collins," Mark said, forcing the name out through clenched teeth. "Lives in Colorado Springs. Supposedly a sales rep, but something's off." James tapped away at his keyboard, opening secure databases and running a background check. Mark watched the screen flicker as James pulled up public records, social media profiles, and employment history. "Here we go," James muttered. "Huh, that's odd." Mark leaned closer. "What's odd?" James squinted at the screen. "The guy's employment history is a mess. Says here he's worked as a pharmaceutical rep, a contractor, and a fitness instructor, all within the same year. No continuity. Plus, the social media profile looks like it was set up recently. Barely any history before a year ago." Mark's gut twisted. "Can you go deeper? Military databases?" James hesitated. "You sure? We could get flagged for this." "James, please, I have to know." With a reluctant nod, James accessed the military intelligence network. It took a few minutes, but finally the screen flashed with more detailed data. "Holy hell," James whispered. "This guy's a ghost. Some records show he's been flagged in the past for false identification. Connected to shell companies registered offshore. He's not just some regular guy." Mark felt the blood drain from his face. "Shell companies? Where?" "Delaware, mostly. Some traced to the Cayman Islands. Whatever he's doing, it's not just shady, it's coordinated." James continued to dig, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Wait, here's something else. Transactions linked to these shell companies match deposits in accounts under different aliases. One of those aliases matches a known operative. Pavel. Snick, A suspected intelligence agent. Mark's hands tightened into fists. An operative, as in foreign intelligence? James turned to look at him, eyes wide. Yeah, this isn't just about cheating, Mark. Your wife's new boyfriend might be a goddamn spy. Mark forced himself to breathe. It was one thing to deal with infidelity, but espionage. He couldn't let his emotions control him, not now. James, we need to trace any financial links to Emma, Mark said, his voice low and steady. James nodded and redirected his search to the family's joint accounts. After a few minutes, he frowned. There's a separate account linked to her name, not one of the joint ones. And it's receiving deposits from another shell company. Date the deposits, Mark ordered. James pulled up the history. First deposit, 7 months ago. Coincides with your last deployment. Regular deposit since around the same time as your security clearance updates. Mark's mind raced. Was Emma involved, or was she just being manipulated? The man, Daniel Collins, or rather Pavel Resnick, had targeted his family. But why? Can you check Emma's communications? Mark asked. James hesitated again. This is getting into real murky territory. I'll take the heat if it blows back. Please just do it. James nodded, typing in more commands. A few minutes later, he accessed Emma's email and phone records. There's a series of encrypted messages. Looks like they were sent through a secure app. Also a few calls to unlisted numbers. And here, look at this. Mark read the screen. The text messages between Emma and Daniel were vague but hinted at plans for the future. Moving in together, dealing with the military problem, and how to manage custody of the kids. James leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Mark, this is bad. If this guy's connected to foreign intelligence and she's giving him access to your life, this could be a major security breach. Mark's thoughts were a whirlwind. Had Emma knowingly conspired? Or was she just a pawn in something much bigger? James placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. Listen, buddy, you can't just storm in there. You need proof. Undeniable, concrete evidence. Go home on leave, act normal, gather intel. Then, when you have enough, hit them with everything. Mark nodded slowly. He couldn't afford a rash move. He had to protect his kids, secure his career, and expose whatever this was without tipping his hand too soon. You're right, Mark said, straightening. I'll put in for emergency leave. In the meantime, can you keep digging? I need to know everything about Daniel. Aliases, addresses, anything. James gave him a determined nod. I'm on it. Be careful, Mark. You're dealing with more than just a cheating wife. Mark took a deep breath, steeling himself. Betrayal hurt, but being used as a pawn in espionage was a new level of hell. He wouldn't just stand by. He would gather evidence, secure his family, and then make sure that Daniel, or Pavel, would never see freedom again. As he left the comm center, Mark knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about his marriage anymore. This was about national security, and he wasn't going to lose. The military jet touched down with a jolt, the familiar thud of wheels hitting concrete grounding Mark Caldwell back to reality. His grip tightened on the armrest as the plane taxied down the runway, engines whining to a slow crawl. Outside, the Colorado Springs skyline loomed distant but welcoming. He was home. But this wasn't a celebratory return. It was a tactical maneuver. He stepped off the aircraft, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, eyes sharp and scanning. He had reported a family emergency to his commanding officer, citing issues that required his immediate attention. No one questioned it. 14 years in military intelligence earned you certain leniencies, especially when you never asked for them. A black sedan waited at the curb, courtesy of the base's logistics unit. Mark slipped into the back seat, barely noticing the driver's greeting as he stared out the window, mentally running through the plan he'd laid out with James. Return home. Act normal. Gather evidence. Wait for the right moment to strike. He had done this countless times overseas, gathering intelligence, observing patiently, waiting for the enemy to slip. Only this time, the battlefield was his own home. Mark stepped out of the car, and closed the door quietly behind him. The driveway was empty. Emma's car wasn't back yet. Good. He wanted a moment to catch his breath before facing her. He approached the front door, hesitating for just a moment before sliding the key into the lock. The door swung open, and the familiar scent of vanilla candles and freshly laundered linen filled his lungs. "Dad?" A voice rang out from the living room. A second later, his son Lucas came barreling down the hallway, his face lit up with pure joy. "Dad, you're home!" Mark knelt, catching his son in a tight embrace. "Yeah, buddy, I'm home." His voice cracked just slightly, the weight of the past few days pressing against his chest. Lucas pulled back, his eyes wide. "I thought you weren't coming back for a long time. Is everything okay?" Mark forced a smile. "Everything's fine, just some things I needed to sort out here. Where's your sister?" Before Lucas could answer, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Hannah appeared, her eyes already shimmering with tears. She ran to him, arms outstretched, and Mark caught her in a hug, lifting her off the ground. "I missed you so much, Dad," she whispered, burying her face in his shoulder. "I missed you too, sweetheart." They stayed like that for a while, his children clinging to him as if he might disappear again. Mark's eyes flickered to the family portraits on the wall, the perfect smiles frozen in time. He wondered how long those smiles had been a lie. It was another hour before Emma pulled into the driveway. Mark was seated at the kitchen table, watching Lucas attempt to build a Lego fort while Hannah scribbled in her notebook. He heard the car door slam shut, followed by the sharp click of heels against pavement. Emma's silhouette appeared through the glass pane of the front door, pausing for a moment as if composing herself. Then the door swung open, her eyes locked onto his. Immediately, and for a fraction of a second, her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Mark, I didn't know you were coming home." Her voice was strained, like she had rehearsed the line but not the delivery. "Family emergency," Mark replied smoothly, rising from his chair. He approached her, planting a gentle kiss on her cheek. "I thought it was best if I came back and handled things personally." Emma blinked, her eyes darting nervously to the kids. "Everything all right?" Mark nodded. "It is now." The evening wore on with strained politeness. Mark helped Lucas with his homework while Emma cooked dinner, her eyes flicking to him every few moments as if expecting him to disappear. During dinner, Lucas started talking, his voice bright and cheerful, oblivious to the tension hanging thick in the air. "Mr. Daniel's been teaching me how to throw a curveball," Lucas chirped, mouth half full of spaghetti. Mark's fork paused, midway to his mouth. He set it down gently. "Mr. Daniel?" "Yeah," Lucas continued, oblivious to Emma's sharp intake of breath. "He comes over sometimes. Mom says he's just helping around the house, but he's real good at baseball. He even has a Harley. It's so cool." Mark felt his jaw tighten, but he forced his expression to remain neutral. "That's nice of him. How often does he come by?" I don't know, like twice a week, sometimes more." Lucas shrugged. He even helped fix the shower. Emma cleared her throat loudly, interrupting. "Lucas, honey, eat your dinner." The boy shrugged and shoveled another forkful into his mouth. Mark met Emma's gaze across the table, holding it for a beat longer than necessary. Her eyes flitted. "Way." Later that night, while Emma showered, Mark went to work. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, placing tiny cameras in strategic spots. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway leading to the bedrooms. He placed a small recording device behind the bookshelf in the study, concealed by framed family photos. If Daniel or Pavel was coming back, Mark would know. It didn't take long. Over the next few days, Mark gathered hours of footage. Daniel slipping in through the back door with a casual familiarity that made Mark's stomach twist. Emma greeting him with a kiss, their conversations filled with whispered promises and casual laughter. Mark watched and listened, stone-faced, as Emma spoke freely about the divorce. "He's gone most of the time anyway. The judge will side. With me. They always do. Military dads never win custody battles," she bragged one evening. Daniel's voice, smooth and confident, echoed back. "And once the house is yours, I'll move in. We won't have to sneak around anymore." Emma laughed. "He won't know what hit him. Deployments work in my favor. He's barely even here. The courts will see that. Mark's grip on his tablet tightened, his knuckles going white. He had always suspected her selfishness, but to hear it confirmed with such confidence stung like a bullet to the chest. He shut the tablet with deliberate calm, his decision clear and unyielding. Emma wanted a war? Fine. But she underestimated him. She saw him as a soldier, someone who followed orders, someone predictable. What she forgot was that he wasn't just any soldier. He was trained in counterintelligence, surveillance, and extraction. He looked at the darkened screen, his own reflection staring back with hard, unyielding eyes. She wanted a fight. He'd give her one, but it wouldn't be in a courtroom. It would be a war of information, a battle of evidence. And she wouldn't see it coming. The courthouse loomed ahead, its stone pillars towering like silent sentinels over the bustling city street. Mark stepped out of the car, straightening his uniform, each metal polished to a perfect shine. His boots clicked against the concrete as he approached the entrance, every step calculated, every movement deliberate. This wasn't just a custody hearing. It was a battlefield. Inside, the hallways buzzed with muted conversations and the shuffling of paperwork. Lawyers and clients brushed past him, their eyes catching on his military dress uniform, some nodding respectfully, others casting wary glances. Mark ignored them. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, focused on the courtroom door at the end of the hall. He pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. Rows of pew-like benches stretched across the room, with a raised dais at the far end, where Judge Kimberly Harding presided. Emma was already there, seated at the front with her attorney, Sandra Taylor. Emma was dressed sharply, a tailored navy blue suit that screamed affluence and confidence. Her blonde hair was swept back and her makeup was pristine. She looked like someone ready to win. Sandra Taylor leaned over and whispered something into Emma's ear, causing her to smirk. Mark clenched his jaw but kept his expression neutral. He had played this game before. Keep your cool. Don't let them see you flinch. He strode confidently to his seat where Matthew Hayes, his lawyer and former JAG officer, stood waiting. Matthew clapped him on the back. You ready for this? Mark nodded. More than ready. Judge Harding called the court to order, her voice firm and authoritative. We are here today to discuss the custody and property settlement in the case of Caldwell versus Caldwell. Her gaze swept over the room, finally resting on Mark. Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate your service. It's not often we see uniforms in this courtroom. Thank you, Your Honor, Mark replied, his voice steady. Sandra Taylor rose gracefully, smoothing her skirt as she stepped forward. Your Honor, before we begin, I would like to address the obvious, she said, her voice dripping with professional charm. My client, Mrs. Caldwell, has been the primary caregiver for their children for the past several years. Mr. Caldwell's deployments have rendered him largely absent from their daily lives. It is our position that his emotional instability, worsened by years of combat exposure, makes him unfit for primary custody. Mark felt his jaw tighten, but Matthew placed a hand on his arm, a silent reminder to remain composed. Sandra continued, pacing slightly as she spoke. We have testimony from Mrs. Caldwell's neighbors, teachers, and family members who can attest to her dedication to the children's well-being. Meanwhile, Mr. Caldwell has been deployed overseas, subjected to conditions that are well known to cause post-traumatic stress and emotional volatility. She paused dramatically, looking directly at Judge Harding. We believe the children would be best served by remaining with their mother, in the only home they've ever known. Matthew stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He was a bear of a man, broad-shouldered and towering, with a reputation for ruthlessness in the courtroom. He adjusted his glasses and addressed the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit a motion to present evidence that is directly relevant to the welfare of the children and the integrity of this case. Sandra scoffed. Is this going to be another wild accusation, Mr. Hayes? Matthew didn't even look at her. He stepped over to Mark, who reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sealed manila envelope, its edges crisp and untouched. Judge Harding raised an eyebrow. Mr. Hayes, what exactly are you presenting? Matthew approached the bench, setting the envelope carefully in front of her. Your Honor, what you have here is irrefutable evidence that pertains not only to this custody case but also to national security. A ripple of whispers swept through the courtroom, but Judge Harding held up her hand. She picked up the envelope, inspecting it carefully. This is highly irregular, Counselor. Matthew nodded. I understand, Your Honor, but once you open that, I assure you, you'll understand the gravity of the situation. Judge Harding considered him for a moment before sliding a letter opener beneath the seal. She pulled out the documents, her expression remaining neutral at first, but as she flipped through the pages, her eyes widened. Her mouth tightened into a thin line. The room fell silent, tension simmering just below the surface. Sandra fidgeted, with her pen glancing at Emma, who was beginning to look pale. Finally, Judge Harding looked up. I am calling an immediate recess, she declared, her voice firm. Bailiff, secure the courtroom. A murmur of confusion spread through the audience. Mark sat calmly, his hands clasped neatly in front of him. Across the room, Emma's eyes darted back and forth, confusion and fear spreading across her face. What's going on? She whispered to Sandra. I don't know, Sandra stammered, clearly blindsided. A door near the judge's bench swung open, and 3 FBI agents entered, followed by 2 military police officers. They moved with purpose, their expressions hard and unyielding. Daniel. Collins, the lead agent called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Emma's head whipped around. What are they talking about? Mark remained silent, watching it unfold with a steely gaze. He had spent weeks gathering information, recording conversations, compiling evidence, and connecting dots. He had played the long game, and now it was time for the final move. The FBI agent stepped forward. Daniel Collins, also known as Pavel Resnick, you are under arrest for espionage against the United States, conspiracy to commit fraud, and engaging in unauthorized intelligence gathering. The color drained from Emma's face. Espionage, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel, what is this? Pavel, stood up slowly, his eyes locked on Mark. For a moment, the mask of suburban charm fell away, replaced by something cold and calculating. He didn't say a word as the FBI agents cuffed his wrists, reading him his rights with practiced efficiency. Sandra staggered backward, clutching the table. Your Honor, this is absurd. I don't understand. Judge Harding slammed her gavel. Order! I want this courtroom secure and all evidence cataloged immediately. This case is adjourned until further notice. Emma turned to Mark, desperation and betrayal warring in her eyes. What did you do? She hissed, her voice cracking. Mark met her gaze, unblinking. I did what I always do, Emma. I defended my family. The military police led Daniel away, his eyes never leaving Mark's until he disappeared through the double doors. Mark straightened his uniform and nodded to Matthew, who gave him a satisfied grin. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a tactical masterpiece. Emma's world was crashing down, and she didn't even know the half of it yet. The light filtered through the blinds of Mark's new apartment, casting stripes of sunlight across the living room floor. The place was small, modest, but it was theirs. Just him, Hannah, and Lucas. His military pension and combat pay had secured the lease, and Mark chose the location strategically, close to their school, away from prying eyes, and fortified with state-of-the-art security. Cameras blinked silently. From every corner, motion sensors lined the windows, and an encrypted alarm system tied directly to his tablet. No one was getting near his children without him knowing. The children were still asleep, their backpacks neatly lined up by the door. Mark poured himself a cup of coffee, the silence broken only by the hum of the fridge. He took a long sip and stared out the window, his gaze distant, replaying the events of the past week. The image of Daniel Collins, or rather, Pavel Resnick, being dragged out of the courtroom in handcuffs was seared into his memory. The FBI agents had moved swiftly, voices firm and unyielding as they read him his rights. Emma's shock had been palpable. She had stumbled back into her seat, her eyes wide and unfocused, hands shaking as they cuffed her too. "You're detaining me?" she had shrieked, voice rising to a pitch Mark had never heard before. Her lawyer, Sandra Taylor, had stammered, flipping through papers, utterly blindsided. The lead FBI agent stepped forward. "Emma Caldwell, you are being detained for questioning regarding your involvement in espionage and conspiracy to access classified military information. You have the right to remain silent." Emma had turned to Mark, desperation pouring from her eyes. "Mark, you can't let them do this. I didn't." "No, I swear I didn't know." Mark had met her gaze evenly. "I think you knew enough." She was led away, hands bound, her face twisted with disbelief and terror. Mark hadn't looked away, hadn't flinched. He watched until the doors swung shut and the whispers in the courtroom faded into silence. The next 48 hours had been a whirlwind. Matthew Hayes had been relentless, leveraging the arrest to secure emergency temporary custody of Hannah and Lucas. Judge Harding had barely hesitated, signing the order with a stern nod. "Given the circumstances, Mr. Caldwell, I find it appropriate that you be granted sole custody until further review." The words had felt like a balm, soothing wounds he didn't know he'd been carrying. For the first time in months, Mark felt the tension in his shoulders ease just slightly. The kids had taken it harder than he'd expected. Hannah had cried the first night in the new apartment, curled up on the couch with her knees pulled to her chest. Lucas had clung to Mark, his small fists gripping his uniform like it was his lifeline. "Is Mom coming back?" Lucas had asked. His voice barely a whisper. Mark had knelt down, leveling his gaze with his son's. "Not for a while, buddy." He reached out, placing his hands on Lucas's shoulders. "But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." That night he had sat by their bedsides until they fell asleep, his mind racing through every step he needed to take to secure their lives, to rebuild what had been shattered. Mark's military training had prepared him for this moment. In the weeks leading up to the courtroom takedown, he had worked tirelessly with James Monroe to track Daniel's movements. Surveillance footage, financial records, and encrypted emails painted a damning picture. Daniel Collins, under the alias of Pavel Resnick, had operated as a sleeper agent, using Emma as his entry point into Mark's life. The shell companies Mark and James uncovered were fronts for money laundering, transferring funds between offshore accounts and slipping bribes to Emma under the guise of investment returns. Mark had traced it all, every transaction, every visit, every dinner marked as a business expense. The pieces fell into place, the mysterious deposits in Emma's hidden account, the dinners in distant towns, the fitness classes she suddenly became so devoted to. All coordinated, all calculated. The sense of vindication that surged through him after the courtroom sting was almost primal. Emma hadn't just been unfaithful, she'd been complicit in something far greater. Whether she had known the full extent of it or not, she had allowed someone dangerous into their home, into his children's lives. Mark was meticulous about establishing new routines. The kids were enrolled in nearby schools, their pickup and drop-off times staggered to avoid predictable patterns. He made sure they knew the emergency protocols, who to call, where to hide, what to do if something went wrong. Each evening Mark would sit with them at the dinner table, going over their day and subtly asking if they'd seen anyone unfamiliar, or heard anything strange. It was casual. He didn't want them to feel paranoid, but it was necessary. He installed a panic button in his room, linked directly to the police. Cameras were hidden in flower pots, motion sensors were tucked behind picture frames, and the doors were reinforced with heavy-duty locks. He was done taking chances. 3 days after the arrests, there had been a knock on his door. Mark opened it to find Emma's parents, their faces pale and lined with grief. Her mother, Margaret, clasped her hands together, eyes brimming with tears. "Mark, please," she began, her voice trembling. "She didn't know, she couldn't have known. Daniel tricked her, he manipulated her." Her father, George, stepped forward, his gaze hard but desperate. "Just please consider helping her, she's still the mother of your children." Mark stood there, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. He finally shook his head. I appreciate what you're saying, but my priority is Hannah and Lucas. Emma made her choices. Now she has to live with them. Margaret sobbed, collapsing into George's arms. Mark watched them walk away, his heart heavy but resolute. He wasn't going to risk his children's safety for anyone's version of redemption. Mark placed his coffee mug down and glanced at the clock. 6:30 a.m. The kids would be up soon. He walked down the hallway and cracked open their doors, peeking in to see them still sleeping, their faces peaceful and untouched by the chaos of the adult world. He wouldn't let them feel the weight of, not now, not ever. That was his burden to carry, and he would shoulder it with pride. His life as a soldier had prepared him for war zones, but his role as their father had prepared him for this, a fight worth winning. Mark straightened, his mind sharp and clear. He knew there were still battles to come. Court hearings, custody, disputes, maybe even attempts at manipulation. But he was ready. He had faced worse enemies before. This time the stakes were just higher, and he would protect them, no matter the cost. The ocean breeze swept across the outdoor terrace, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. Mark sat at a small round table, his fingers wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. He watched as the waves rolled in steady patterns, cresting and crashing against the shoreline with a rhythm that felt almost meditative. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries distant and serene. For the first time in what felt like years, he allowed himself to breathe. The cafe was quiet, just a few early morning patrons scattered among the tables. He chose the far corner by the railing, where he could see everything, the beach stretching. Endlessly to the left, the city skyline framed by sunlight to the right. It was his sanctuary now, a place where thoughts could unravel without consequence. Mark took a sip of his coffee, its warmth spreading through his chest. He had been coming here every morning since moving to the new apartment. Dropping the kids off at school, setting up their routines, making sure everything was locked down and secure. Those were the priorities now. Everything else was secondary. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone, its screen lighting up with a notification. An email, U.S. Department of Defense, subject, position opportunity, Military Family Protection Unit. Mark tapped. It opened, his eyes scanning the contents. It was a formal offer. Lead coordinator of the Military Family Protection Unit, a new branch designed to help military families secure their homes and protect their children from targeted threats. They wanted him to run it, to use his experience to train others in surveillance, counterintelligence, and protective protocols. His brow furrowed as he read further. The position was non-deployable, based out of Colorado Springs, with flexible hours and direct involvement with military families nationwide. It was everything he had wanted, a chance to protect others like him, families who might not see the threat until it was too late. Mark placed the phone back on the table, his mind turning over the possibilities. It would mean stability. No more long deployments, no more missed birthdays or empty chairs at the dinner table. He could finally be there for Hannah and Lucas, fully, completely. And it would mean using everything he had learned from Emma's betrayal, from Daniel's espionage to keep others safe. He leaned back in his chair, the sun warming his face as memories filtered through his mind. Emma's smile as she lied to him. Daniel's smug grin when he walked through Mark's front door. The courtroom's sting when the truth unraveled, exposing the web of deceit. There were days when the anger still flared up, searing and raw. He had trusted her, trusted his family to be untouched by the dangers of his work. He knew better now. Danger didn't always wear a uniform or march with an army. Sometimes it wore perfume and whispered promises of loyalty. But he couldn't linger in that darkness. He wouldn't. Hannah and Lucas needed more than a father haunted by betrayal. They needed someone who would protect them, teach them, and show them that strength wasn't just about fighting. It was about surviving, about rebuilding. Mark took another sip of his coffee and set the cup down with a resolute tap. He looked out at the waves again, watched them crash and recede, never stopping, never surrendering. He picked up his phone, thumb hovering over the reply button on the email. He didn't hesitate. He tapped accept. his chest feeling lighter than it had in years. This was his new mission, protecting what mattered most, not just for him, but for others like him. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and stood, adjusting his coat as the breeze tousled his hair. He pulled out a few bills from his wallet, tucking them under his coffee cup before nodding to the waitress at the counter. Mark stepped away from the table and moved towards the exit, his stride strong and purposeful. The sunlight bathed his face as he walked out onto the boardwalk, the air crisp and full of promise. He paused for just a moment, looking back at the cafe, the place where he had finally made his decision. Then he turned and walked into the sunlight, his silhouette stretching long and confident against the pavement. There was work to be done, and this time, he would protect what mattered. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long, golden streaks across the backyard. Hannah and Lucas ran through the grass, their laughter ringing out like music. Mark stood at the edge of the deck, his hands resting on the smooth wooden railing, watching them chase each other with wild abandon. Lucas squealed as Hannah caught him, tackling him into a pile of leaves. They both erupted into giggles, their faces flushed with joy. Mark couldn't help but smile. This was what he had fought for, peace, safety, and innocence, protected from shadows they would never have to know. Their new house wasn't grand, but it was theirs. The windows were reinforced, the doors double-bolted, and the property lined with discreet motion sensors and security cameras. Every detail had been planned, every risk accounted for. His training had ensured that. His mistakes had guaranteed it. But it wasn't just about walls and locks. It was about trust, a fortress not built with bricks and steel, but with vigilance and love. Mark had learned that resilience wasn't just about standing firm. It was about building stronger than before, reinforcing the cracks and sealing the vulnerabilities. Since taking the role at the Military Family Protection Unit, his days were filled with purpose. He trained other soldiers and their families, taught them how to secure their lives, how to watch for signs, how to shield themselves from the kind of betrayal he had endured. It was work that mattered, work that saved lives before they even knew they were in danger. Hannah called out to him, waving from the garden. "Dad, come join us." Mark pushed off from the railing, his smile widening. All right. You better be ready, though," he called back, his voice full of warmth. He jogged out to the yard, his boots crunching through the grass. Lucas shrieked in mock terror, diving behind his sister for protection. "You can't hide from me," Mark bellowed, scooping them both up as they squealed with laughter. He spun them around, their giggles rising into the sky, louder than the wind, stronger than any fear. When he finally set them down, Lucas looked up, eyes bright. "Dad, are we safe now?" Mark knelt, placing his hands firmly on his son's shoulders. He met Lucas's gaze, unflinching. "Yes, son, we're safe, and we always will be." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across their yard, Mark took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. He glanced back at the house, his house, fortified and secure. A promise to himself, to his children. Never again would he be caught unaware. Never again would he trust blindly. He had built a fortress, not just of stone and steel, but of resolve. A foundation laid with the hard lessons of betrayal and the unyielding strength of a father's love. And as the last rays of sunlight flickered out, he knew without a shadow of a doubt, they were protected. Mark wrapped his arms around his children, pulling them close. The world outside could rage and threaten, but here, in this space within the walls he had built, they would always be safe, because he had made sure of it.